There are moments in life when silence feels heavier than sound, when the quiet of a familiar place suddenly turns into something else, something that demands to be noticed. That afternoon in September was one of those moments. The sun was beginning its slow descent over Ottawa, its amber light spilling through my kitchen window and resting softly on the worn wooden table where I'd spent countless evenings, some alone, others filled with laughter that now existed only in memory. The house was still, save for the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. I wasn't expecting anything that day. Not a visitor, not a phone call, certainly not a letter. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are, listening in the comments. Yet there it was. A cream-colored envelope sat neatly on the table, out of place in its quiet confidence. No stamps from overseas. No fancy printing. No return address, just my name. Handwritten in that familiar, deliberate scrawl I hadn't seen in months. Ethan's handwriting. My son. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it. A part of me wanted to leave it untouched, to preserve that fragile moment before I knew what it held. For months, I had wondered if he would ever reach out. I had replayed our last conversation 100 times in my head, each time hoping the ending might somehow change. But it never did. Ethan and I hadn't spoken since spring. What began as small disagreements about work, about choices, about money, had hardened into something colder, sharper. Words became weapons, and silence became our battlefield. I thought time might heal it. It hadn't. And now, out of nowhere, this envelope. I sat down slowly, my hand hovering above it. The paper was smooth, thick, the kind of stationery people use when they want to make something official. My name stared back at me, penned with precision. No trace of hesitation. It was Ethan's handwriting, but different somehow. It looked distant. I told myself not to expect too much. Maybe it was an invitation to his wedding. Perhaps, or a simple note to reconnect. Maybe this was his way of reaching out, of breaking the silence. After all, hope is a stubborn thing. It lingers even when reason tells you it shouldn't. I tore the envelope open, my hands trembling slightly, not out of fear, but from the weight of anticipation. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in thirds. For a brief second, I allowed myself to believe it might say something simple, something human. Dad, I miss you. But as I unfolded it, the illusion shattered. What I saw first wasn't handwriting. It was printed text, lines, columns, numbers. En un voice, at the top, bold and impersonal, were the words, Wedding Contribution Statement. My eyes traced the list that followed. The details sharp and deliberate times. Venue the Grand Chateau. Montreal, Himbia. Nul, catering gourmet dining for 250 guests 25. Ling 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 Chung photography videography full event coverage. 7 million. 000 times live band jazz ensemble $5. 000, and at the bottom, a short handwritten note, the only personal touch in the entire letter. Dad, after everything that's happened between us, I'm letting you contribute. This is your share of the costs. Please send the check by the end of the month. Sophia and I are counting on it. I read the note again. Then again, my pulse quickened, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes already knew. I looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd taught Ethan to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, where we'd celebrated birthdays and shared quiet dinners after his mother, Rachel, passed away. The same place where, Years ago, he'd promised me that no matter what happened, we'd always have each other. And now, a bill, not an invitation, not a letter, a transaction. For a moment, I couldn't move. The world seemed to narrow until all I could see were those numbers cold. Precise. Mocking. 50,000 for the venue. 25 for the food. 15 for the photos. 5 for the band. And my son's handwriting beneath it all. Asking, no, demanding my share. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. I had always known that Ethan was ambitious. Driven. I admired that in him. But this was something else, entirely. This wasn't ambition. This was entitlement. I tried to understand, to rationalize. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he didn't mean it that way. But the phrasing was too careful. Es tu deliberate. I'm letting you contribute, as if my role in his life had been reduced to a financial obligation. The memories flooded back in sharp flashes, the nights I'd worked overtime at the factory after Rachel's death. In the mornings I'd packed his lunches while fighting exhaustion, the pride I'd felt when he graduated, the tears I'd hidden when he moved away. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every unspoken prayer, all of it condensed into a line item on an invoice. My throat tightened. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. I was hurt, deeply, quietly hurt. The kind of hurt that sits heavy in your chest, that makes you question everything you thought you knew about love and family. I folded the letter back along its creases. Careful, deliberate, almost reverent, as though it were something fragile. And in a way, it was the fragile remains of what I had thought we still shared. The late afternoon light had shifted by then, growing softer, weaker. Shadows stretched across the kitchen, long and distorted. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside, the world going on as if nothing had happened. But inside, something irreversible had changed. I stared at the envelope again, that cream-colored paper, that careful handwriting, and I realized that this was no mistake. This was who Ethan had become. The silence of the house pressed in around me, thick and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers. But instead, I just sat there, staring at that single sheet of paper, the ink blurring as my eyes welled up. A thought whispered at the edge of my mind. Uninvited but relentless. Where did I go wrong? I had done everything for him. Everything. And still, somehow, it wasn't enough. I don't know how long I sat there, motionless. Eventually, I reached for the envelope and slipped the letter back inside. My hands had stopped shaking. My breathing had steadied. The sharp pain had dulled into something else, something colder, clearer. It wasn't anger that filled me then. It was clarity. This letter wasn't a request for money. It was a message that the boy I had raised, the boy who once looked up at me with wonder and trust, no longer saw me as his father. And as the last light of day faded from the kitchen window, I made a quiet promise to myself. This would be the last time I allowed myself to be treated as an afterthought. Tomorrow, I told myself, everything would change. I didn't sleep that night. The letter sat on the kitchen table, its edges curling slightly under the weight of the humidity, as though even the paper itself was tired. I left it there on purpose, in plain sight, a quiet reminder of everything I'd given and everything I'd lost. Every time I walked past it, I felt the same dull ache deep in my chest, that heavy, quiet pain that no words could ever seem to touch. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what it meant. Ethan's note had done something I never thought possible. It had stripped away years of illusion. It forced me to see what I had been refusing to admit somewhere along the way. The bond between us had withered. I had been holding on to a memory of who he used to be, not who he was now. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the kind of late-night ritual that felt more like penance than comfort. The bitter taste filled my mouth, grounding me in a reality I didn't want to face. I looked at the clock, 2:17 a.m., and wondered what Ethan was doing at that very moment. Sleeping soundly, perhaps, unaware of the storm his letter had unleashed. It wasn't the first time he'd disappointed me, but it was the first time I felt detached, like something inside me had broken beyond repair. I sat down, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and stared out the window. The city was asleep. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, and the maple tree in the yard swayed gently in the autumn wind. For years, that tree had been our marker of time. Ethan and I had planted it together when he was 6. His small hands had clutched the shovel, his face smeared with dirt, his laughter filling the air as he declared, "This tree's gonna grow tall, just like me." Dad, and it had. Now it stood strong and tall, its branches reaching toward the sky, a living reminder of a promise that time had quietly broken. I used to think love was enough, that if I worked hard, provided for him, and gave him everything I had, it would somehow fill the void left by Rachel's absence. When she died, Ethan was only 10. I remember the way he clung to me at the funeral, his small body trembling, as he tried to understand a kind of loss that words couldn't explain. I had made him a silent promise that day that he would never feel that kind of emptiness again, and so I buried my own grief and poured everything into him. My time, my money, my energy, my dreams. I gave up promotions to be home more. I skipped vacations so he could go to better schools. Every decision I made was for him. And yet, here we were, a $100, 000 bill. For years, I had believed that my sacrifices were building something, a foundation of gratitude, of love, of shared understanding. I thought I was teaching him about perseverance, about loyalty, about what it meant to stand by the people who mattered. But maybe I had been teaching him the wrong thing. Maybe, without realizing it. I had taught him that love could be measured in dollars, that affection could be replaced with obligation. The thought hit me like a punch to the chest. Had I done this, had I raised a son who saw love as a transaction because I'd made every sacrifice look effortless, because I never let him see how much it cost me, I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes, the bitter truth seeping in. I could still hear Rachel's voice sometimes, soft and teasing, telling me that I spoiled him too much. He needs to earn things. Henry, she used to say, you can't protect him from every disappointment. But how could I not? He was all I had left of her. Every time I looked at Ethan, I saw her eyes, the same hazel warmth that used to melt my anger in an instant. Loving him was my way of loving her, of keeping her alive. Now, that love felt like a mistake I couldn't undo. The silence of the house grew louder, pressing against me from all sides. I looked around, the photographs lining the hallway, the faint smell of the wood polish Rachel used to love, the empty chair across from me that had once been hers. All of it carried the ghosts of a family that had once been whole. I picked up the letter again, running my fingers over Ethan's handwriting. Dad, after everything that's happened between us, what had happened between us? It wasn't just distance or time. It was something deeper, a slow erosion, years of unspoken words and misaligned expectations. He had grown up chasing a life I didn't understand, a life filled with luxury, ambition, and appearances, and I had watched from afar, proud, but also afraid. Afraid that the harder he climbed, the further he'd drift from the roots that had once grounded him. I used to tell myself that the distance was normal, that all parents eventually lose a part of their children when they grow up. But this was different. This wasn't independence. This was detachment. A small laugh escaped me. Bitter and hollow. Please send the check. Had written Zrine as if I were some investor in his happiness, as if love were something to be billed and repaid. The pain didn't come in a rush. It came in waves, slow, measured, unrelenting. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up waiting for him to come home from parties in college, and the mornings I'd driven him to soccer practice before dawn. The way his face used to light up when I showed up to school plays, even after working 12-hour shifts. Those moments had been real. I knew they had been. So where did that boy go? Somewhere along the way. Life had hardened him, and maybe me too. I had given everything I could, and in return, I had lost the very thing I was trying to protect our connection. I rubbed my temples, the exhaustion seeping deep into my bones. Maybe I had been naive to believe that love alone could survive the weight of years in silence. Maybe every parent eventually learns this, that no matter how much you give, there comes a day when you have to let your children fail. Let them stumble. Let them learn what pain feels like. But this wasn't just a stumble. This was betrayal. I got up, the chair scraping against the floor, and poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. The dark liquid swirled and disappeared down the drain, leaving only a faint trace of bitterness. As I stood there, my reflection stared back at me from the window, older, wearier, with lines etched deep from years of worry. There was a time when I would have done anything to protect Ethan from pain. But now I understood that sometimes pain was the only teacher left. I looked back at the letter one last time before turning off the kitchen light. The house fell into darkness, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. That letter had ended something between us, but maybe, just maybe, it had also begun something new. Not forgiveness, not yet, but awareness. I knew then that I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my sacrifices. I had to confront what was left between us, not with anger, but with truth. Tomorrow, I decided, would not just be another day. It would be the day I stopped being silent, the day I began to act. When the morning came, the light felt different. It wasn't the soft, forgiving kind that filters gently through the curtains. It was sharp, the kind that exposes everything it touches, the kind that leaves nowhere to hide. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter still lying there like an accusation, and realized that the exhaustion I felt wasn't just from lack of sleep. It was from years, decades of giving without question. That night had carved something out of me. The ache of disappointment had settled into something colder, more resolute. For the first time, I saw my relationship with Ethan for what it really was, not a bond of love and understanding, but a chain forged by obligation, by habit, by my inability to let go. And as painful as it was to admit, I had helped build that chain. Every decision I'd made, every sacrifice, had been done with good intentions. But somewhere along the way, I had blurred the line between love and dependency. I had given too much, protected too often, forgiven too easily. In trying to shield Ethan from hardship, I had robbed him of the very thing that makes a man accountability. The realization hit me with the quiet force of truth. I hadn't just raised a son who took me for granted. I had taught him to The thought made me sick. I stood up, pacing the length of the kitchen, the floor creaking softly under my steps. The anger that had once burned in me was gone now, replaced by a strange calm, a clarity that felt both terrifying and liberating. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about payback. It was about something far more important. It was time for Ethan to face the consequences of his choices. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I wanted to save him. I knew my son. Beneath the arrogance and the entitlement, there was still a spark of the boy I had raised, the one who used to look at me with pride, who once promised me he'd make me proud. That boy was still in there somewhere. I just had to find a way to make him remember who he was. But words wouldn't be enough. Not this time. He wouldn't listen to a lecture. And he certainly wouldn't be moved by guilt. He needed to see what his choices had created. He needed to feel it. That was when the plan began to take shape. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name, Alex Bennett, Ethan's old college friend. I hadn't spoken to Alex in years, but I remembered him well. Sharp, observant, a good kid who had grown into a good man. Unlike Ethan, he hadn't lost touch with where he came from. When I called, he picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Walker," he said, his voice hesitant but polite. "It's been a long time." "It has," I replied. "How have you been?" "Alex." We exchanged small talk for a few minutes, the kind of polite back and forth that people use to bridge years of silence. Before I got to the point, I told him about the letter, about the invoice, about the way Ethan had treated me. Alex was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "I'm really sorry to hear that. Ethan's changed a lot." "See ya." I tried to talk to him a few times, but he's surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear. I sighed. "That's exactly why I'm calling you. I need your help." "My help, yes. Ethan's wedding is in a few weeks. Isn't it?" "It is. The Grand Chateau. Montreal." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I want you to be there. Not as a guest, as an observer. I need you to keep an eye on things. Quietly. Tell me what you see, how things unfold. Don't interfere. Just watch." Alex hesitated. "You mean like report back? Something like that." I said, "You see, Alex, I'm not sending the money. Not a cent." There was silence on the other end. Then, softly, "Good." His answer surprised me. It continued. "He needs this. Mr. Walker. He's built everything around this image, this perfect life, this perfect wedding, but it's all built on borrowed ground. Maybe if he sees it fall apart, he'll finally understand what really matters." Exactly. We talked a bit longer, agreeing that Alex would attend discreetly, posing as a guest of one of Ethan's mutual friends. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. Not over Ethan, but over myself. For years, I had been reacting to his choices, cleaning up his messes, smoothing over his mistakes. But now, I was acting. This time, I was the one setting the terms. I spent the rest of the day going through old photographs. Ethan as a child, grinning, carefree, mud-streaked from the backyard. Ethan on his first day of school, clutching Rachel's hand. Ethan at his graduation, that same confident smile plastered on his face. I traced his features with my eyes, searching for some sign of the man he'd become, wondering how such innocence had turned into entitlement. But the more I looked, the more I realized that maybe it wasn't him who had changed completely. Maybe I had changed too. Grief does strange things to people. It distorts priorities, rearranges love into something unrecognizable. When Rachel died, I became obsessed with being enough for Ethan, enough father for two parents. I overcompensated. I gave when I should have withheld. I solved problems that he should have solved himself. And in doing so, I had created a son who didn't know how to stand on his own. But that was about to change. I knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be anger, confusion, maybe even hatred. But if that was the price of honesty, I was willing to pay it. For once, Ethan needed to see the truth that love isn't measured in dollars, and that respect isn't owed, it's earned. As the sun dipped low that evening, I stepped outside for some air. The chill of early autumn wrapped around me, and I watched as the wind carried a few stray leaves across the lawn. That same maple tree stood tall in the yard, its branches swaying gently, older, stronger, resilient. It had survived storms, and so would we, inside. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. The decision I'd made filled it with a strange energy, the quiet hum of purpose. I walked back to the table, picked up Ethan's letter, and read it one last time. This time, I didn't feel the sting of betrayal. I felt something else, resolve. I'm letting you contribute. He'd written. A faint smile touched my lips. No, son, I whispered. This time, you'll be the one contributing. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer beside Rachel's wedding ring, a symbolic reminder of everything that had once been built on love, not expectation. Tomorrow, Alex would begin preparing for the wedding. Tomorrow, the first domino would fall. And tomorrow, Ethan would begin to learn the lesson that money could never buy. Not through punishment, not through anger, but through truth. The truth that love without gratitude isn't love at all. It's debt. And I was done paying. The days that followed passed in a strange kind of calm, the kind that always comes before a storm. After I'd made my decision, something inside me settled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing after Ethan's approval or drowning in guilt for not being enough. I was simply still, purposeful. Alex kept in touch, sending me brief messages as the wedding preparations unfolded. Each one was a glimpse into a world that no longer felt familiar, a world of luxury and excess, all wrapped in the illusion of perfection. They've booked a 7-piece band. One message read, Sophia's mother hired a social media team to film the wedding for online coverage. Ethan looks stressed, keeps mentioning deadlines and sponsors. Sponsors. The word struck me harder than I expected. Even his wedding, the supposed celebration of love, had become a production. Something to be managed, curated, sold. Every update reminded me just how far Ethan had drifted from the world I'd raised him in. A world where you didn't need to perform your happiness, where love didn't need an audience. And yet, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt anticipation, not for his failure, but for his awakening. I wanted him to see the truth, to feel it. The morning of the wedding arrived cold and gray. The sky hung heavy over Montreal, thick with clouds that promised rain. I woke early, the air sharp and cool, and poured myself a cup of coffee. It felt like any other day, yet the air buzzed with a quiet tension, the kind you can sense even miles away. At 9:03 a.m., Alex sent his first update. Setup is behind schedule. The florist is late. I read the message, took a sip of coffee, and waited. By noon, another came. Catering truck, stuck in traffic. Sophia's panicking. Ethan's trying to stay calm, but he's losing it. I could almost picture it. Ethan standing there in his tailored suit, jaw tight, pretending everything was under control while the world around him began to crack. By 2 o'clock, the rain began to fall. Not a gentle drizzle, but a steady, unrelenting downpour that drenched the manicured lawns of the Grand Chateau and turned the elegant garden ceremony into a muddy chaos. Alex's next message came with a photo rows of white chairs sinking into wet grass, petals from the floral arrangements plastered to the ground, like tiny defeated flags. They're trying to move it indoors. He wrote, half the guests are still stuck in traffic. Band's equipment is wet. The planner looks ready to cry. I sat in silence, staring at the image. The irony wasn't lost on me. All that money, all that planning, undone by something as simple as rain. There was a lesson in that. Nature doesn't care about status. Weather doesn't care about wealth. And life doesn't bend to the will of those who think they can control it. By late afternoon, Alex's updates had become more frequent. Fragments of a crumbling Fodade power outage in the reception hall. Photographer slipped on wet marble. Camera broken. Ethan's arguing with the planner. Sophia's in tears. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt some twisted satisfaction that the universe was delivering a kind of justice I couldn't have orchestrated better myself. But all I felt was sadness, because I knew how this must have felt for him, the panic. The humiliation, the sinking realization that no amount of money could fix what was broken. Not the wedding, not the moment, not our relationship. And still, part of me hoped this would be the moment he'd finally open his eyes. The phone rang at 6:47 p.m. Dad, it was his voice, shaky, tight, unsteady, a voice I hadn't heard in months, yet one I'd know anywhere. Ethan, I said quietly, setting my coffee aside. How's the wedding? There was silence on the other end, broken only by the faint sound of rain and muffled voices. It's falling apart, he admitted, his voice cracking. The venue flooded. The band left. Half the guests went home. He stopped, inhaling sharply. We need money. Dad, we need to pay the vendors, or they'll walk. Please. For a moment, I didn't answer. I could hear his desperation, his fear, and beneath it, something else, something raw. Ethan, I said finally, this isn't about money anymore. He said nothing. You've built your life around the idea that everything can be bought, that problems disappear if you throw enough money at them. But the truth, son, is that some things can't be fixed that way. Some things have to be faced. Dad, please, he whispered, almost childlike. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I interrupted, though my tone was calm, not harsh. I understand that you've forgotten what it means to earn something, to fight for it. You've forgotten what it means to fail. His breathing was unsteady. So you're not going to help me? I hesitated. The silence stretched between us, heavy and painful. No, Ethan, not this time. I could almost hear the moment the words sank in. The hurt in his voice when he spoke again was like a knife to the chest. I thought you wanted to be part of my life, he said bitterly. I do, I answered softly, but I want to be part of your real life. Not this illusion you've built. The kind where you know who you are, not who you're pretending to be. He didn't respond. The line went quiet. Then the faint click of disconnection. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear. Long after the call ended, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, thick with everything we hadn't said. Hours passed before Alex messaged again. It's over. Vendors packed up. Guests gone. Ethan's devastated. He's not talking to anyone. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The lesson had begun, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief, the quiet, necessary kind that comes when something old must die for something new to take root. That night, as rain lashed against the windows, I thought about Rachel, about what she would have said if she'd seen all this. She'd probably have told me I was being too hard on him, that love means forgiveness, that patience heals more than punishment. And maybe she would have been right. But as much as it hurt to admit, Ethan didn't need forgiveness right now. He needed truth. Sometimes love isn't soft. Sometimes it's the thing that lets the storm come, not to destroy, but to cleanse. When I finally turned off the lights, I looked at the empty chair across the table, the one Ethan used to sit in during Sunday breakfasts, and whispered into the dark, "This isn't the end. Son, it's the beginning." Because deep down, I believed it, that in the wreckage of that perfect wedding, in the rain-soaked ruins of everything he thought mattered, Ethan might finally find the one thing he'd been missing all along, humility. And from humility, maybe, just maybe, he'd find his way home. The rain finally stopped sometime around dawn. When I stepped outside, the world looked washed clean, the driveway slick with silver light, the maple leaves glistening like shards of glass. The air smelled fresh, sharp, almost new. But inside me, nothing felt new, just hollow. The phone sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, silent since last night's call. I hadn't expected Ethan to reach out again so soon, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping he would. There's a strange kind of pain that comes from doing the right thing, the kind that doesn't fade easily, because it asks you to sit with your guilt and trust that time will prove you were right. I made myself a cup of coffee and stared out the window at the tree we'd planted years ago. Its branches were dripping with rain, bending slightly, but never breaking. For a moment, I thought about that night when Ethan was 6, the two of us digging holes in the dirt, his small hands covered in mud. I remember how proud he'd been of that little sapling. It's ours. Dad. It'll grow up with me. It had. But somewhere along the way, we'd stopped growing together. The memory hurt. But it also gave me something I hadn't felt since the wedding day, hope. Because if that tree could survive the storms, maybe we could, too. 2 days passed before I heard from Alex again. He's not doing well. The message read, "He's been quiet since the wedding, barely talking. Sophia went to stay with her parents. I think reality's finally sinking in. Reality. It was a cruel teacher, but it never failed to get the lesson across." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat with the thought, letting it settle in my chest. For years, I'd shielded Ethan from this, from failure, from disappointment, from the brutal truth that life doesn't always go the way you plan. Maybe this was what he needed. Maybe this was the first real step toward growing up. Still, I couldn't help but worry. The silence between us, though necessary, felt like a wound left open too long. There's only so much you can learn in the dark before the loneliness becomes unbearable. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. Dad, the sound of his voice soft. Rough, uncertain, caught me off guard. "Ethan," I said quietly. I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. Steady, but shaky. I didn't know what to say. He admitted, "Everything's a mess. The wedding, the money, Sophia's gone to her parents. I've been sitting here trying to figure out how everything fell apart." I stayed silent, letting him talk. And I keep coming back to one thing. he continued, his voice cracking. You were right about everything. I closed my eyes, not out of pride, but out of relief. The words carried a weight I hadn't expected to hear so soon. I thought I had everything figured out. He went on. The house, the job, the wedding. I thought if I made everything perfect, people would finally see me the way I wanted to be seen. But it was all fake. I didn't care about the marriage, not the way I should have. I cared about the show. His honesty hit me harder than any accusation ever could. And when it started to fall apart, he said, the first thing I did was call you. Not because I wanted help, but because deep down, I knew you'd still pick up. I knew you'd save me like you always have. His words hung in the air, fragile and trembling. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered. I don't even know where to start making it right. I took a breath, steadying my voice. Ethan, I don't need an apology. I just needed you to see, to really see. I do now, he said. I see what I've done to you, to myself. I've spent so long chasing things that don't matter, and I forgot about the things that do. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint hum of city traffic on his end, the world continuing on as if nothing monumental had happened. But for us, everything had. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said finally, but I want to try. I want to fix this. A part of me had waited years to hear those words, and yet, hearing them didn't bring triumph. It brought something quieter, something truer. I never stopped believing you could. Son, I said softly, but fixing it doesn't mean pretending this never happened. It means building something better, slowly. Honestly, I know, he said. I'm ready to do that, if you'll let me. There it was, the vulnerability I hadn't seen in him since he was a child. The wall between us had finally cracked, not from confrontation, but from the quiet collapse of pride. When the call ended, I sat for a long time, staring at the maple tree again. The sun had broken through the clouds, and its light glimmered off the wet bark. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Over the next few weeks, Ethan called more often, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. The conversations were short at first, awkward, hesitant, like two people learning a language they'd once spoken fluently. But little by little, the rhythm returned. He started asking questions about Rachel, about the years after she died, about what it was like raising him alone. He listened, really listened, and for the first time, I could tell he wasn't just hearing the words, he was understanding them. One evening, he called just to talk about nothing in particular. The weather, a new project he was working on, the book he'd started reading. It was ordinary conversation, the kind that once would have seemed insignificant. But to me, it meant everything. That's how healing works, I suppose. It doesn't arrive with a grand gesture. It comes in small moments, a phone call, a shared laugh, a silence that doesn't feel so heavy anymore. There were still cracks. Of course, some wounds take longer to close than others. But the difference now was that he was trying, and so was I. One morning, a few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail, a cream-colored envelope, but this time with a return address. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the handwriting. It was from Ethan. Inside was a short note, just a few lines. But each word carried more meaning than any grand apology could. Dad, I've been thinking a lot about everything you said, about love, about gratitude, about what it means to really show up for someone. You've done that your whole life, and I'm only just beginning to understand what it costs. I can't repay that, but I can start honoring it. I want to come visit soon. There's something I'd like to show you. Love, Ethan. As I read, I felt the familiar sting of tears, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from relief. The letter wasn't long. It didn't need to be. It was proof that the message had reached him, not through anger, not through money, but through truth. I placed the letter beside the old one, the bill, in the same drawer where Rachel's wedding ring rested. 2 letters, side by side, one written in entitlement, the other in humility, one marking the breaking point, the other marking the beginning. When I closed the drawer, I realized something simple, yet profound. Sometimes love has to shatter before it can heal. Sometimes you have to let someone fall apart before they can find their way back to you. And as I sat there in the quiet morning light, I whispered softly to Rachel, to myself, to the boy who had finally become a man. He's coming home. When Ethan's letter arrived, it was as if the house itself exhaled. For months, the air inside these walls had felt thick with silence, the kind that hums beneath every creak of the floorboards and lingers in the empty spaces between conversations that never happened. But now, holding that cream-colored envelope in my hands, I felt something stir, something warm, uncertain, and quietly hopeful. He was coming home. The words echoed in my mind as I read his note again, tracing the careful handwriting that I hadn't seen in years. This wasn't the sharp, calculated script from the bill. This was something softer, more deliberate, as if every letter had been written with intention. He wanted to show me something. I didn't know what it was, but, for the first time in a long while, I didn't need to. The gesture itself was enough. The week that followed felt both endless and fleeting. I found myself preparing in ways that felt almost ritualistic, cleaning the kitchen, polishing the old coffee table, dusting the picture frames that lined the hallway. It wasn't about appearances. It was about readiness. I wanted the house to feel like home again, not just for me, but for him. I even baked the apple pie Rachel used to make, the one Ethan loved as a boy. The scent filled the house with something I hadn't felt in years: comfort. When the day finally came, I caught myself glancing out the window every few minutes, like an old man waiting for the mail. The sky was clear, washed in that soft gold light that only autumn in Ottawa could offer. The maple tree outside was shedding its leaves in slow, graceful waves, the kind of beauty that asks nothing of you except to notice it. And then, just as the afternoon sun dipped low, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether he still belonged here. Ethan looked older than I remembered, not in the way that years make a man older, but in the way life does, the kind of aging that comes from lessons learned the hard way. His suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. His posture was still proud, but no longer rigid. He carried no arrogance, no armor, just a quiet humility that I recognized immediately. When he saw me standing on the porch, he paused. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. 2 men who had once shared everything and then shared nothing, now standing on the fragile bridge of forgiveness. Then he smiled. A small, uncertain smile, but real. "Hi, Dad." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I heard my own voice respond. "Hey, son." The sound of those words, simple, ordinary, felt extraordinary. As he approached, I noticed his eyes flicker toward the maple tree. "It's still here," he said softly. "Of course," I replied. "It's weathered a few storms, but it's still standing." He smiled again, and I could tell he understood what I really meant. Inside, the house seemed to welcome him in its own quiet way. The air felt lighter, the walls less heavy. He paused by the photographs on the wall, Rachel holding him as a baby. His first day of school, the two of us fishing by the lake. I saw his hand hover near one of the frames, as if he wanted to touch it but didn't quite dare. I haven't been here since, he trailed off. I know, I said gently. A lot's changed. He nodded. And a lot hasn't. We sat in the kitchen, the same table where I'd once read his letter, the one that had broken me. Now it felt like the perfect place to start again. I poured him a cup of coffee. Black. The way he used to drink it when he wanted to feel like an adult. The first few minutes were awkward, the kind of silence that carries too much history. But then, slowly, conversation began to take shape. He asked about work, about the neighborhood, about the old dog we used to have. I asked about his job, about how he was really doing. He didn't hide behind rehearsed answers this time. I've been rethinking everything, he said. The wedding was a wake-up call. I lost a lot, friends. Money. Reputation. But honestly, that's not what hurts. What hurts is realizing how far I drifted from the people who mattered most. I listened quietly, letting him speak. There was no lecture to give, no correction to make. He was already learning the lesson. I've started volunteering, he added after a pause, at a youth center downtown, helping kids with career prep. Mentorship stuff. It's grounding. I smiled. That sounds like a good place to start. He nodded, and for a moment, the tension that had once defined us began to dissolve. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small photo album, worn, creased. The kind of thing you handle often because it means something. I wanted to show you this, he said, sliding it across the table. Inside were photos, old ones, pictures I hadn't seen in years. He'd taken the time to restore them, print them, frame them in order. Each one told a piece of our story, Rachel's smile, Ethan's first fishing trip, our Christmas mornings, and at the end, a new photo, Ethan standing beside the maple tree, sunlight filtering through the branches. I went by the old cabin last week, he said softly. It's still standing, a little run down. But I'm fixing it up. I want to make it our place again, a reminder of where we came from. I thought maybe, when it's ready, you'd come with me. My throat tightened. It wasn't just a gesture. It was redemption. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. I'd like that very much. He looked at me then, not as a son seeking approval, but as a man seeking connection. There was no pride left. No defensiveness. Just honesty. I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight, he said quietly, but I want to keep showing up. For you, for myself. I squeezed his hand, the warmth of it grounding me. That's all I ever wanted. Ethan, for you to show up, outside. The last of the daylight filtered through the trees, painting the kitchen in gold. The scent of apple pie still lingered in the air. And for the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. We didn't need to say more. The conversation had already happened in all the ways that mattered. Later, when he left, I stood on the porch and watched him drive away. The maple tree swayed gently in the wind, scattering a handful of leaves across the path like a quiet blessing. As the car disappeared down the road, I realized that the ache in my chest, the one that had lived there for so long, was finally beginning to ease. Ethan hadn't just come home. He had brought something back with him, a piece of us that I thought had been lost forever. And for the first time in years, I believed that maybe love, once broken, could truly be rebuilt, not by forgetting the past, but by honoring it. Tomorrow, he would come again. And the day after that, maybe I'd finally visit the cabin. For now, though, I sat on the porch, the cool air wrapping around me, and whispered into the fading light, "Welcome home, son." It was a week after Ethan's visit when he called again. His voice sounded lighter this time, still measured, still careful, but no longer weighed down by guilt. "Dad," he said, "the cabin's ready." I didn't answer right away. For a moment, I just sat there, phone pressed to my ear, letting those words settle over me like the first warmth of sunlight after a long winter. The cabin. I hadn't been there in nearly 20 years, not since Rachel passed. It had been our refuge, our summer escape, a place that had witnessed laughter, arguments, and the quiet rhythm of family life. When she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to go back. It felt too heavy with memory, too full of ghosts that refused to fade. "Are you sure?" I asked finally. "I am," he said softly. "I've been fixing it up for a while now. The roof needed patching. The dock's almost done. It's not perfect, but it's ours again. You should see it." The hesitation in his voice told me this wasn't just about the cabin. It was about us. "All right," I said. "I'll come." He laughed quietly, a sound that carried relief more than joy. "Good. I'll pick you up Saturday morning." When the call ended, I sat for a long moment, staring at the maple tree outside. Its leaves had begun to fall in earnest now, blanketing the yard in a soft mosaic of gold and rust. Change was coming, not the kind that sweeps in overnight, but the kind that settles slowly, gently, until one day you realize it's been there all along. The drive to the cabin was quiet. Ethan focused on the road, and I watched the landscape unfurl through the car window, the familiar stretch of winding highways and pine forests, the small towns that seemed untouched by time. Every mile we passed seemed to peel away the years between us, layer by layer. At one point, he glanced at me and smiled. "You used to whistle on this drive," he said. "I did," I asked, feigning surprise. "Yeah." He chuckled. "Mom used to say it was your way of pretending you weren't lost." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. She wasn't wrong. For the first time in years, it felt easy between us. The air in the car was light, unburdened by the ghosts of the past. When we finally turned down the old dirt road that led to the lake, my breath caught in my throat. The trees arched overhead, their branches intertwined, like hands clasped in memory. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in soft patches, scattering gold across the dashboard. And then, there it was, the cabin. It looked smaller than I remembered, but somehow more alive. The wood had weathered to a deep amber tone, the porch railing slightly crooked, the windows gleaming under the afternoon sun. The dock extended into the water like an open arm. Newly rebuilt. Ethan parked the car and turned to me, his eyes bright but cautious. "Well, what do you think?" I stepped out slowly, taking it all in. The smell of pine and lake water hit me instantly, the same scent that had once defined my summers. My chest tightened with nostalgia, a blend of ache and gratitude. "It's perfect," I said quietly. He smiled, and for a fleeting second, I saw the boy he once was, standing barefoot on that same porch, hair messy, eyes full of wonder. Inside, the cabin was simple, but warm. The old fireplace still stood, its stones darkened with age, The wooden floors creaked underfoot. The same song they'd always sung. But there were new things. Two, a fresh coat of paint, repaired furniture, photographs on the mantel. I froze when I saw them. Rachel's photo, the one from our first trip here, sat in the center, surrounded by smaller frames of Ethan and me through the years. He'd even included a picture from the last visit, when Ethan had been barely a teenager, sitting beside me on the dock with his fishing pole and that proud grin. "She still belongs here," he said quietly, following my gaze. I wanted her to be part of this again. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. We spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking groceries and tidying up, though it didn't need much. There was a rhythm between us now, unspoken. Easy. He'd start a task. I'd finish it. I'd make a joke. He'd add a memory. The distance between father and son felt smaller with every passing hour. As dusk settled, we stepped out onto the porch. The lake shimmered under the fading light, the surface rippling like liquid glass. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of cedar and water. Ethan handed me a mug of coffee and leaned against the railing beside me. "Do you remember the first time you taught me to fish here?" he asked. "How could I forget?" I smiled. "You were so impatient. You nearly fell into the lake." He laughed. "I think you were more scared than I was." "Probably," I admitted. For a while, we just stood there in silence, watching the reflection of the sky melt into the water. The quiet between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of meaning. Full of the things we no longer needed to say out loud. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking a lot about Mom lately, about what she'd think of all this. Should be proud," I said softly. "Not because we fixed everything, but because we tried." He nodded slowly. "I think so too." The wind stirred gently through the trees, carrying the faint sound of water against the dock. For a long while, we just listened. When the first stars began to appear, Ethan turned to me. "You know," he said, "for a long time I thought growing up meant proving something. Having the best job, the nicest house, the perfect life. But standing here now, I think it's just this knowing what matters and who matters." I looked at him, and in that moment, I didn't see the boy I'd raised or the man he'd become. I saw both, and I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: peace. "You've learned the most important lesson," I said. "It took us both long enough." "Didn't it?" he smiled, the firelight from inside flickering across his face. "Better late than never." As the night deepened, we built a small fire by the shore. The flames danced in the darkness, their reflection shimmering across the water. We talked for hours, about Rachel, about mistakes, about forgiveness, and about the future. The conversations we'd avoided for years finally found their place. When the fire burned low, Ethan looked at me and said quietly, "I'm glad you came, Dad." I nodded, my chest full. "So am I, son." He stared into the embers for a while, then whispered, almost to himself, "This feels like home again." And it did. The cabin, the lake, the stars above. All of it felt like a piece of the past restored. But more than that, it felt like a promise that we were no longer defined by what had broken us, but by what we had rebuilt. As I sat there beside my son, the sound of the lake lapping against the shore, I realized that some places, like some relationships, never truly disappear. They wait, quietly, for us to find our way back. And that night, under the canopy of stars, and the whisper of wind through the pines. I knew we finally had. That night by the fire stayed with me long after the flames had turned to embers. Even after Ethan had gone to bed, I remained by the water's edge, staring out at the dark, glassy surface of the lake. The moon hung low, soft light glinting across the ripples. And for the first time in decades, I felt a quietness inside me that wasn't emptiness. It was peace. It wasn't the loud, triumphant kind of peace, not the kind you get from winning something. It was the kind that settles in slowly, like morning light filtering through an open window. Gentle, earned. The fire hissed as the last bits of wood gave in to the night. I thought about everything that had brought us here. The anger, the silence, the heartbreak, and finally, the understanding. I realized that healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about learning to live alongside it until it no longer controls you. For so long, il le regrette film, I'd replayed every mistake. Every moment I thought I'd failed Ethan. Every silence that lasted too long. But sitting there, surrounded by the stillness of the lake and the whispering pines, I understood something simple and profound. Love isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by persistence, by showing up again and again, even when it hurts. When morning came, the light was soft and golden, spilling across the water like honey. I woke to the sound of the cabin floor creaking, the same sound that had once woken me when Rachel moved through the kitchen. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, I almost expected to see her there, humming as she made coffee. But it was Ethan. He was standing by the stove, pouring water into the old kettle. His movements were careful, reverent, as though he knew he was moving through a space that held history. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder with a smile that was equal parts nervous and warm. "Morning," I replied. He set a cup in front of me, black coffee, just how I like it. "Still remember," he said with a grin. "Some things stick," I said, and we both laughed. After breakfast, we took a walk down to the dock. The wood was cool beneath our feet, damp from the morning dew. The air smelled of cedar and lake water, sharp and clean. The world felt impossibly still, like it was holding its breath for us. Ethan leaned against one of the posts, looking out at the horizon. "You know," he said, "I used to think you were invincible." I smiled faintly. "Invincible? I don't think anyone's ever called me that before." He shrugged. "When I was a kid, you were everything strong. Certain, unshackable. Even after Mom died. You just kept going. I thought you never broke." I stared at the water, watching the sunlight dance across its surface. "I broke plenty of times," I said softly. "I just made sure you didn't see it." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the lake. "Maybe that's where I went wrong. I thought strength meant never falling apart. So, I built walls instead of bridges. I thought if I looked perfect, I'd be safe. That's not strength, Ethan," I said gently. "That's fear. Real strength is letting yourself be seen, cracks and all." He looked at me then, his expression open. "Vulnerable. I get that now. I wish I'd understood it sooner." "You understand it now?" I said. "That's what matters." For a long moment, we stood in silence, the wind tugging gently at our clothes. Then Ethan crouched at the edge of the dock and trailed his fingers through the water. "Mom used to make me count the ripples," he said it was good luck. I smiled. "She said that to both of us." He looked up at me. "Do you still think about her?" "Every day," I said. "But it's different now. It's not the kind of thinking that hurts. It's the kind that reminds me I was lucky to have her, even if it was for too short a time. He nodded slowly. I think about her too, lately more than ever. I think she'd want us to be here, like this. She would, I said. She always believed love could outlast pain. Ethan smiled, his eyes glistening. She was right. We spent the afternoon fixing a few things around the cabin, the railing on the porch, a loose hinge on the door, the old fishing rods. It felt good to work side by side again, to share something physical, something real. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. Every movement, every shared glance, said enough. As the sun began to set, we sat on the porch, our tools put away, the lake shimmering in the fading light. The sky blazed in shades of orange and rose, the reflection rippling softly across the water. Ethan broke the silence first. You know, he said, I used to think healing meant going back, like if we could just erase everything, we'd be okay again. But that's not it. Is it? I shook my head. No, son. Healing isn't going backward. It's going forward, carrying the scars but not letting them define you. He nodded thoughtfully. Then I guess we're healing. Yes, I said, smiling. We are. The quiet between us felt different now. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of understanding. The kind that comes when two people have finally said everything that needed to be said, and more importantly, I heard it. After a while, Ethan turned to me. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. When you got that bill from me, he began carefully. What did you feel, honestly? It took a deep breath. The memory flashing through me, the shock, the anger, the ache. At first, I said, I felt betrayed, like all the years. All the sacrifices had been reduced to a price tag. But then I realized something. That letter wasn't about me. It was about the man you'd become and the man you still had the chance to be. That's why I didn't send the money, not to punish you, but to give you a chance to find yourself again. He looked at me for a long time, eyes filled with emotion. Thank you, he said finally, for not giving up on me. I smiled softly. That's what fathers do. Ethan, we wait. Sometimes longer than we should. But we wait. The last rays of sunlight dipped behind the trees, and the first stars began to appear quiet witnesses to our reconciliation. The night grew cooler, and we sat in silence, listening to the soft rustle of the wind through the pines. After a while, Ethan spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to come back here every year. Just us. No distractions. No expectations. I'd like that, I said. He smiled. And in that moment, I realized something profound. This wasn't just the end of our story. It was the continuation of it. The healing would go on. One visit, one conversation, one shared silence at a time. Later, as I lay in the small cabin bed, I listened to the sound of the lake lapping against the shore. And I thought of Rachel. For the first time, I didn't feel the ache of loss. I felt gratitude for her, for Ethan, for the brokenness that had somehow led us back here. Life, I realized, isn't about perfection or control. It's about endurance. It's about showing up. Even when you've been hurt, even when it seems too late. As the darkness deepened, I whispered softly into the quiet, we made it, Rachel. And in the stillness of that moment, with the lake breathing softly outside and my son sleeping in the next room, I could almost hear her voice in the wind. You did good, Henry. I smiled. Tears blurring my eyes, and let sleep take me, the kind of sleep that only comes when a heart has finally found peace. The morning after our night by the lake began in quiet gold. The world outside was still half asleep, the air cool and damp, the surface of the water perfectly still, like glass stretched thin across the earth. Ethan was already awake, sitting at the end of the dock with a fishing line dangling into the mist. His figure was backlit by the rising sun, and for a moment he looked almost like that boy from so many years ago, patient, curious, unburdened by the weight of life. I watched him from the porch, coffee warming my hands. He hadn't noticed me yet. There was something grounding about that, seeing my son at peace. Even for a moment, for years, I'd believed legacy was something grand, a house, a fortune, a name remembered, but standing there, watching Ethan framed by the morning light, I realized that legacy isn't about what we leave behind. It's about who we leave behind, and what of ourselves remains in them. It struck me that perhaps, after all this time, I hadn't failed as a father. I'd just misunderstood what success looked like. "Morning," Ethan called over his shoulder, spotting me at last. "Morning," I said, walking down the steps toward him. "Any luck?" he smiled, shaking his head. "Nothing yet. But I don't really mind." I sat down beside him on the dock. "The wood cool under us? You know," I said, "you used to get frustrated if a fish didn't bite in the first 5 minutes." He laughed softly. "Yeah, I thought patience was a waste of time back then." And now he glanced at me, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Now I think it's the only thing that matters." We sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. The world felt softer now, not because it had changed, but because we had, after a while. Ethan reeled in his line and set the rod aside. "Dad," he said quietly, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy, about what kind of man I want to be. For a long time, I thought it was about what people see, the image, the success, the reputation. But after everything that's happened, I realize it's not about that at all." He looked at me then, his eyes steady. "It's about how you make people feel when they think of you, how you show up when it matters. You did that, Dad, even when I didn't deserve it." His words landed deep. I wanted to tell him that I hadn't always been strong, that there were nights when I'd sat alone in this very cabin and questioned everything, my parenting, my choices, my worth. But as I looked at him now, I realized that none of that mattered anymore. The mistakes, the guilt, the years lost to silence, they were all part of the same story that had brought us here. "I think that's the real inheritance," I said finally. "Not money, not property, not achievements. It's the quiet lessons, the ones we don't even know we're teaching." He nodded. "Like patience and forgiveness," I added. That word hung between us for a moment. "Fragile but powerful." Ethan stared out at the water. "It's strange," he said. "For so long, I thought forgiving meant letting someone off the hook. But now I get it. It's really about setting yourself free." I smiled. "You sound like your mother." He chuckled softly. "She always said I'd turn into you one day." "She said the same thing about me turning into my father," I said. "Guess she was right on both counts." The conversation drifted then, as conversations between fathers and sons often do, from the serious to the ordinary. We talked about work, about books, about how fast the world seemed to move now. But underneath it all was something new, a gentleness, a mutual respect that had once seemed impossible. As the sun climbed higher, Ethan stood and stretched. "There's something I want to show you," he said. He led me back toward the cabin and into the small living room. On the table sat a wooden box, polished, simple, the kind of craftsmanship you don't see much anymore. "I made this," he said. "It's not perfect." But he lifted the lid to reveal a stack of papers, photographs, and letters. I recognized some of them immediately. Rachel's old postcards, school drawings Ethan had made as a child, birthday cards we'd exchanged over the years. But mixed among them were new things, handwritten notes, reflections, even journal page. "I started writing again," he said quietly. "Mostly about us, about the things I never said. I thought maybe one day, if I have kids, they'll read it and understand where we came from, who we were." My throat tightened. "That's beautiful, Ethan," he smiled, though his eyes glistened. "It's my way of making peace, I guess, of turning all the mistakes into something that lasts." I reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's what legacy really is, son. Taking the pain and turning it into something that helps someone else." We stood there in silence, the past and the future colliding in that small wooden box. Later, when the afternoon faded into gold again, we sat on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee, watching the light stretch across the lake. The air smelled of pine and warmth, and the world seemed to hum with quiet contentment. Ethan turned to me suddenly. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes. But if they had, we wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't trade this moment for anything." He smiled softly, and in his eyes, I saw reflection not just of myself, but of Rachel, too. The compassion, the strength, the quiet fire. She lived on through him, and maybe that was the greatest comfort of all. The sun dipped lower, the lake turning to molten amber. I felt the weight of years, not as a burden, but as a gift time had not taken from me. It had refined me. As the shadows lengthened, Ethan spoke again. "Dad, I want you to know something, no matter what happens next. I'll keep this everything we've learned, everything we've been through. I'll carry it forward. For you, for Mom." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the boy I'd raised, not the man who'd lost his way, but the legacy I was leaving behind, not through blood or name, but through understanding, through forgiveness, through love. "You already have," I said quietly. He smiled, and in that smile was everything, the past forgiven, the future embraced, the present finally enough. We stayed there until the stars appeared, their reflections trembling gently on the lake's surface. The air was cool, the night silent except for the rhythmic breath of the water. As I leaned back in my chair, I realized that I didn't need anything more from life. I had lived, I had lost, and I had loved fiercely, imperfectly, completely. And in my son's steady presence beside me, I saw the proof that even the most broken stories can still end in grace. That night, long after the stars had scattered across the lake like shattered glass, Ethan went to bed. I stayed outside, unable to bring myself to move. The world around me was silent, not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that holds everything. The lake breathed softly. The trees whispered with the wind. And somewhere in that stillness, I felt Rachel's presence, not as a memory, but as something real, alive in the air between my son and me. I thought of how far we'd come, from anger to understanding, from silence to conversation, from distance to closeness. The road had been long, marked with wounds and lessons I hadn't known. I still needed to learn, but now, sitting there in the silver glow of moonlight, I finally understood something I had resisted for years. Peace doesn't come when life becomes perfect. It comes when you accept that it never will be. When morning came, the light spilled gently into the cabin, golden and patient. I woke before Ethan and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet pine and earth. The world was waking slowly. A loon called across the water, and somewhere deep in the forest, the echo of a woodpecker began its steady rhythm. It struck me then that life was made of these moments, small, fleeting, and easily overlooked. For years, I had measured time in milestones, birthdays, graduations, achievements. But as I stood there watching the sunlight dance on the lake, I realized that the truest measure of life is found in the spaces between those moments, the quiet pauses where love lingers, unspoken but present. Ethan came out not long after, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You're up early," he said, his voice still thick with morning. "Old habits," I replied. "Coffee's ready." He smiled, stepping beside me. We drank in silence, side by side, as the sun lifted higher. After a while, he turned to me. "Dad, do you ever think about what comes next?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean today? Or in the bigger sense?" He chuckled softly. "The bigger sense." I thought about it. Once, that question would have filled me with unease. The unknown had always been something I tried to control. But now, I felt no fear. "I used to," I said. "I used to worry about how much time I had left, what kind of mark I'd leave behind. But now I think I'm okay not knowing. Maybe what comes next isn't for us to decide. Maybe it's for those we leave behind to carry forward." He nodded slowly, taking that in. "You mean like me?" "Like you," I said, smiling. The rest of the day passed in an easy rhythm. We fixed a loose shutter on the cabin, walked through the woods, and cooked lunch together. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and soup, the way Rachel used to make it. We talked about her again, not with the heaviness of grief, but with warmth. Every memory felt lighter now, touched by gratitude instead of sorrow. That evening, as the sun began to sink behind the trees, Ethan suggested one last walk before we packed up. We followed the narrow path that curved around the lake, the leaves crunching softly beneath our boots. The air had that sharp, sweet smell that comes only in autumn, a reminder that change is both inevitable and beautiful. As we walked, Ethan said quietly, "You know, I used to be afraid of becoming you." I turned to him, a bit surprised. "Oh," he smiled ruefully. "Yeah, you worked so hard, gave up so much, and I thought that meant losing yourself. I didn't want that. But now, I see you didn't lose yourself. You found something deeper. You found meaning." I looked at him, my heart full. Meaning doesn't come from what we get, Ethan. It comes from what we give and from who we become in the process. He nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand that now." We stopped at the edge of the lake where the water met the trees. The setting sun cast a golden path across the surface, and the sky blazed in shades of orange and crimson. It felt like the world itself was exhaling. Ethan crouched, picking up a smooth stone and skipping it across the water. It danced 3 times before sinking. "Mom would have loved this," he said softly. "She's here," I replied, "in you, in me, in everything she touched." He smiled, the kind of smile that comes from a place of peace. We walked back in silence, the light fading behind us, the world settling into evening. When we reached the cabin, I paused at the door and turned to look at it one last time. The weathered wood, the porch where we'd talked, the dock that reached into the still water. It had once been a symbol of loss, a place I avoided because it reminded me of everything I'd lost. But now, it had become something else, a symbol of return, of reconciliation, of love that refused to die. That night, before bed, Ethan handed me a folded sheet of paper. "For you," he said. I opened it after he'd gone to his room. It was a letter. "Dad, I don't know if I'll ever be able to say this enough, but thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. You've shown me what it means to forgive, to grow, to start again. I hope I can live up to that. I hope one day I can be the kind of father you've been to me. Love." Ethan, I sat there for a long time, holding that letter, feeling the quiet weight of it in my hands. And then I smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Because in those words, I saw everything I had ever hoped to pass on. Not wealth, not wisdom, but the simple truth that love, when tested, can still endure. When I finally turned off the lamp and lay in bed, the night outside was calm. The world felt full, as if every moment, every hardship, every choice had led here to this quiet cabin, to this fragile but unbreakable bond between father and son. And in that silence, I found my final lesson, the one I wish I had understood sooner, but which I was grateful to learn. At last, life will break you, love will test you, and time will humble you. But if you keep showing up, if you keep forgiving, listening, and choosing to love, peace will find you in the end. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought again of Rachel, of Ethan, of the journey that had brought us back to each other. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to begin or something to end. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And in that moment, surrounded by the soft hum of the lake, the quiet of the woods, and the steady rhythm of my son's breathing in the next room, I understood that this was it. Not an ending, not even a new beginning, just peace. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.